Welcome to Money 911, the emergency line for all your financial insights and solutions. I'm your host, Kris Miller, your financial first responder. And today, we're dialing up the wisdom to unveil the secrets of prosperity. Our guest is no stranger to unlocking these mysteries. Join me as we uncover the transformational journey on the path to wealth and wisdom with none other than Gregg Braden. Gregg, it's such an honor and privilege to have you here. And, what excites me is that your work transcends boundaries, and from scientific breakthroughs to spiritual insights, you share such a unique fusion that really influences and blows away financial perspectives, because we all know money is energy, but your ability to bridge science and spirituality is like a beacon for people. And I just want to ask you, how does this synergy serve as a compass for the listeners that are listening today as they navigate through this crazy financial situation that we're in and, going into?
Wow, you just covered a lot of ground. First, thank you for my warm welcome. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. I'm coming to you from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. We just did a little calculation, and Kris, this is the 40th year that I've done this work now in one form. I know it's crazy. I don't know where 40 years just went, but
that's crazy.
And it is based. I'm a scientist. I'm a degreed earth scientist. My primary degree. I'm a geologist and geophysicist with a strong background in life sciences, math, physics, computer science. And one of the things I learned as a scientist is that nature does not know about the boundaries that we have used to separate the sciences. Nature doesn't know where chemistry ends and biology begins, or geology ends and physics begins. So I recognized really early on how limited we are in our thinking about life in general, regardless of the sciences, just life, because life doesn't know about those boundaries. And what I found, Kris, was to the degree in my personal life that I could cross those traditional boundaries and allow the systems, I'm a systems thinker, and allow the systems of nature to unfold in my life without trying to compartmentalize them. To the degree I was able to do that, things made sense for me, and both in terms of life, in terms of health, and certainly financially and economically. I don't talk about this a lot because it's not a context, but you're asking, so I'm happy to talk about it. When I was working in the corporations in Denver, Colorado, back in the 80s, is when I first began applying spiritual principles to finances. And specifically, I know some of our community will remember this very well. It was when a man named Robert Prechter had first come out with the Elliott wave theory based upon Fibonacci sequences and Fibonacci cycles. Fibonacci cycles are a deep part of ancient spiritual traditions, as well as biology. Our bodies are designed according to Fibonacci ratios. I don't want to be redundant. Have you covered this with your audiences in the past?
No.
So for example, if you take the distance from the tip of your finger to that first joint, and the tip to the second, and the tip to the knuckle, and that finger to your hand, and your hand to your arm, and the ratio from your nose to your lip and nose to your chin, how far your eyes apart, all of this is based upon what's called the Fibonacci ratio. It is a spiral ratio that governs what we call the Vitruvian Man in Leonardo da Vinci's very famous drawing, where you see the man that is all illustrating Fibonacci principles. Well, Robert Prechter took those ideas of nature and said, well, the markets are a reflection of mass investor psychology. That is a natural function. So that the markets must follow these principles. And he developed what was called the Elliott wave theory at that time, and some people still call it the same thing. And I began using that in markets. It was the first time in my life I had any money coming out of school. I had no money. So it was the first time I had any disposable income where I could explore these kinds of things. And they were successful to the point where I was able to finance my first trips out of the country to explore ancient civilizations and ancient traditions. My first trip was in Egypt in 1986. Then that led me into Peru in '89, and the rest, as they say, is history. So this is a beautiful example of where crossing the traditional boundaries that have separated science, all the sciences, biology, chemistry, geology, physics, spirituality, and the different wisdom traditions of the past, crossing those traditional boundaries without judging what they mean, rather looking for the theme. What are they saying to us? What did our ancestors know in their time that we're only beginning to understand in ours, or maybe that we've forgotten in our time? And so for me, this was a viable place where I demonstrated to myself how practical it could be, and it happened to be in the realm of finance. Now, you see a lot of people are still, a lot of trading happens today, and futures trading happens based on these Fibonacci cycles. And especially where you're seeing this is in the crypto markets today, where people are, going long or short based on where we are in the Fibonacci cycles, which can serve as guidelines. But what's happening now, Kris, is we are in a financial market where the traditional rules and indicators don't mean the same thing anymore.
Exactly.
Because the cycles have been artificially constrained by humans, by regulation, by people manipulating the market, the metals markets. Gold, silver is a perfect example of that. Right. Gold should be way beyond, it's an all-time high. It should be much higher right now. According to the sequence, Fibonacci sequences, we should be looking at around $5,000 gold right now. I think we'll see it. But it's been constrained into this channel for years and years through market manipulation by big banks. And, we all know that story. So we have to be careful using things like the Fibonacci series, because although they tell us where the natural rhythms should be, human intervention is diluting and distorting those markets. So if you're looking at the long game, if you're in your 20s, you can look at the long game. If you're in your 70s, right. I'm still looking at the long game, but it's not quite as long.
Right. 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good, because that sinks in with, I intuitively in the beginning, in my practice, when they wanted me to sell stocks and all the risk, I could not look you in the eyes and say, hey, you need to buy this, Gregg, but I don't want it. I have to own it. And I went to the safe money side and never lost a dime in any market risk. So then I learned everything that you've been talking about, how it's manipulated, and you can't trust what you watch and what you're being told. People have to take the time out, to really learn about what we're talking. But energetically, I titled the show, Unveiling Prosperity, and it really aligns with your work and your dimensional ways, because I wanted to be able to share the wealth and the wisdom that you have inside of your life. You've been able to weave this together and say it so eloquently. So,
well, thank you for that. Well, this is a dance.
Yeah.
I'm going to let the lady lead this dance. I have no idea where we're going. Everything's on the table, and I'm happy to talk about any perspective that you would like. This is completely unscripted. I think our viewers probably know that. So you don't know what I'm going to say, and I don't know what you're going to ask.
Exactly. I'm just like, let the spirit move here, right? Yeah, totally. Well, in these times of financial emergencies, that people are like focusing on immediate gain, and then there's so much fear going on. So how can the principles that you've discovered guide the listeners through to pursue like a long-term prosperity while staying grounded in the present?
Well, I will share my perspective, and this is not financial advice. I'm not going to advise
Right.
anybody to do this, but I would invite people to really check out what we're going to talk about here. We are living a time unlike any time in our lifetimes, arguably unlike any time in recorded human civilization, at least for the last 5,000 years.
That's right.
And that uniqueness is not just in society, it extends into the financial markets as well. And this is one of the problems. I've got friends that have young financial advisors, their 20s and 30s, and their advice is the market always comes back. So, just, go for value. The market always comes back. Part of what makes our time so unique is that we're living a convergence of cycles. And our world is driven by rhythms and cycles that the West has been reluctant to look at. We are not typically taught about the kinds of cycles. So there are nested cycles within cycles within cycles, and I'll just identify a couple of them. Right now, we're living a convergence of three primary cycles: climate cycles, natural rhythms. In the earth, as a geologist, I can tell you that these are natural rhythms. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be responsible and develop clean forms of energy. But right now, there's an attempt to collapse an entire global economy based on information that is simply not true. Humans are not causing climate change, and CO2 levels are not the highest that they've ever been, and they've been much higher, and Earth was much healthier and much greener. That is a narrative that is not popular in the mainstream right now. So what I'll say is we're living a convergence of a climate cycle. So climate change is real. I've been talking about it since the 70s when I was a geologist. We should be preparing to adapt to the changes so that they are not a problem in our lives, rather than viewing climate as a battle. And this is what they do. They pitch it as the war against climate. So everything's got to be a war: the war against drugs, the war against climate, the war against, whatever.
Yeah.
So that would be enough to change the way we live if that was the only thing that's happening, but it's not. In addition to that climate cycle, and this is going to be no surprise to any of our listeners, we are also living what is called a cycle of human conflict. Now, I had the opportunity to talk to the United Nations with a friend of mine, Bruce Lipton, a few years ago. And they asked us what we saw for the next 15 years on Earth so that the UN can develop programs to embrace and adapt to change. And when I talked about the conflict cycle, they said, well, what do you mean? Doesn't conflict just happen when it happens? Isn't it spontaneous? I said, well, it can be, but there are geophysical parameters that that ebb and flow and induce greater or lesser degrees of cooperation and conflict. Now, I don't want to get real technical, but I'll share. Here it is. Here's the bottom line. The magnetic fields of planet Earth interact with the magnetic fields of the human body, the human heart, and the human brain. And scientists know that. That's no secret. It's not taught in universities, but it's a very well-known relationship. So I'm not saying anything new here. When the magnetic fields are low, we are less willing to cooperate and more vulnerable to conflict. When the magnetic fields are high, is when typically we have more peace, more willing to cooperate, better listeners, willing to extend the olive branch of peace. We are now living, in addition to the climate cycle that we're living a period of the low magnetics. Actually in 2021, 22 was the low point. So we're just coming off of that low point, which means we are vulnerable. Now, I want to be really clear. It doesn't mean we have to have conflict. It means that we are more vulnerable and more susceptible. And also, for those that understand this, it's the opportunity to become better listeners, extend the olive branch of peace, and when you look at the cycles, they ebb. It's a sine wave. They ebb and they flow. The beginnings and the ends of all the great wars have been at the top and the bottom of these cycles. So we're also living the greatest opportunity for peace right now. And I think that is important as well because of where we are in these cycles. So now we got climate cycles converging. Now we've got conflict cycles. And the third one is the economic cycles. Now, many of your community, I'm sure, familiar with the Russian economist Kondratiev, early in the 20th century, laid out very clearly and very accurately. He's a brilliant man. The natural rhythms in nature that are reflected in economic cycles. And we are at the close, we're on the cusp, at the close of one and the beginning of another economic cycle right now, where markets take the hit and real assets gain value. So we're talking about commodities, we're talking about energy, oil, water, food, land, metals. Those are the things that maintain their value during the cycles we are right now, whereas paper assets that can dissolve in an hour or a minute, we've seen that happen because there's nothing backing those paper assets other than the trust in the company. They can disappear in a heartbeat. So we're this point in the cycle, commodities typically are a better place for it, not looking at getting ahead necessarily, although you can, but just preservation of what you have. If you want to keep what you've worked hard for, typically at this point in the cycle, investing, and I hesitate, I don't really consider it to be investing. And I'll share my philosophy in this. So, for example, precious metals. I'm a geologist. I believe in precious metals. 5,000 years, precious metals have been the financial structure for civilization. And I'm going to make a distinction here between money and currency. Currency is the dollar bill that we're exchanging, with one another. Money is what really preserves the value. So if you want preservation of wealth, what you want to do is convert your currency. And right now we are living with what is called a fiat currency because there's nothing backing the US dollar since 1971. We went off the gold standard. So it is backed only by what's called the faith and the trust in the U.S. government, which is waning very quickly right now. So if I pick up precious metals, I frame it in my heart, in my mind. I'm converting one currency, which is the U.S. dollar, into another currency that at this time in history and at this time in our society, I feel is more stable and I have more trust in those metals, because the metals will never go to zero in value. If you look at the charts of when the US dollar was created, and where we are right now, the US dollar is lost, depending on which chart. This is the Fed's own chart, are showing about 97% of the dollar, the value of the purchasing power has been lost. And we know that because if you go out, if I go buy, a suit, a business suit, and it's a $2,000 suit, it takes 2,000 of those US dollars to buy that, but it still takes 1 ounce of gold will still buy that same suit. That's the same ounce of gold that was, around 100 years ago. So when we're in, and I'm not saying that we need to flee everything, but I think you have to be very discerning. A lot of the young financial advisors have never seen an economic environment like we have now. They have nothing compare it to, unless they've done their homework. And I actually have family members whose advisors are telling them now, the market will always come back. according to the Fibonacci series, we reached a peak. We may not see another market high, another all-time high for at least another decade or so.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that that will happen, because for the first time, we're about to undergo a massive financial shift,
Right.
because our debt is so great that it can never be paid back.
Yeah.
So we will never pay back. That's, I don't even know what it is now, $33 trillion, and then we're paying the interest on that. We will never be able to pay back that debt. And so there is a movement now
Mm-hmm.
to convert that US dollar to the digital dollar,
Exactly.
with a lot of implications. And once that's done, it will change the way we think about investing, the way we think about it will change what we are capable of saving and what we are
Right.
capable of investing. And for that reason, the advice of a young advisor who's never seen anything like this may not be the best advice for us to just preserve the wealth that we have. So knowing those things, it makes sense. We're all in the system. So we're all
Right.
part, you have to have money in
Yeah.
the system.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to take, you look at it, your wealth, your lifetime of wealth that you need for retirement, or that you need to leave to your kids or your grandkids, or whatever it is that you've worked hard to accumulate. And you have to, as an individual, you have to say, what percentage of this I am absolutely not willing to compromise and lose.
Right.
And whatever that number is for you, you place that into an asset that will hold its value and is not linked to a central banking system,
Yeah.
is not linked to a corporation's quarterly reports. And the
Exactly.
only way I know to do that is through what we call tangible assets. So
Right.
land,
Mm-hmm.
food, water,
Right.
energy. And when I talk about energy, I'm talking about oil and
Mm-hmm.
gas,
Right.
and precious metals. And now, it's a whole conversation. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but we have a class of crypto assets that are outside of traditional banking, that are now being accepted by the major financial institutions like BlackRock and Vanguard, and it gets really tricky,
Yeah.
because most people do not understand what these assets are, but they've heard of them. So the first one that was developed was called Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, Bitcoin is the only safe crypto asset worth putting any money into. There are a number of other ones that followed on. So just I don't want to be redundant.
No, that's
Can we
okay. That's
can we talk
fine.
can we talk about this a little bit?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so
Everything.
so we live in a world where everything has been digitized. All of
Right.
our photographs, our music, our memories, our books, everything is digital. It makes sense that at some point we would have a digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, in my opinion, Chris. It's how it's done.
Right.
And if it's done through a centralized banking system that is all about power and control and limit, that's not a good thing for you and me and our listeners.
Right.
In response to the financial crisis in 2007 and 8, mysteriously, a white paper was released identifying something called blockchain technology. And the first blockchain that was developed was called Bitcoin. There's a lot of mystery around this. No one knows for certain, with absolute certainty, who developed this, because it was a pseudonym that was on the paper. And no one has come forward to claim the authorship of the blockchain technology. Now, let me just say a little bit about blockchain, because I know there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and pushback from our elected representatives. And the one that comes to mind, probably the most visible and vocal, is Elizabeth Warren, who is really pushing back on this technology because it threatens centralized power and centralized banking. and she has her reasons for wanting to preserve centralized banking. So let me just say this. Blockchain technology, first of all, is an amazing technology. It actually mimics the way that information is stored in the human genome.
Hmm.
So in human DNA, every chemical transaction that has ever occurred in our species, there's a record of that in the DNA of our bodies. It is immutable, it is transparent, and it is secure. That principle is embodied in blockchain technology. It is the most transparent record, or it's called a ledger, the most transparent ledger of every transaction, every Bitcoin transaction that precedes the one where you own that Bitcoin is in that blockchain. It is immutable, it is transparent, and it is secure. And those facts right there below the argument that criminals are using Bitcoin. If you want to use a currency for an illegal transaction, what you'd want to use is the US dollar, which cannot be traced, cannot be tracked, and has no transparent. It's the most non-transparent.
Right.
So right there, this is what a blockchain technology is all about. Bitcoin as a blockchain is the most secure on the planet. It has never once been hacked, and it probably never will be, at least until quantum computing comes along. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
If you take it, it is based on an algorithm used by the NSA. The bottom line is, if you take the number of atoms that exist in the physical universe, and if each one of those atoms represented one attempt to hack the BitChain blockchain, you would have to go through all the atoms in the universe for that to happen. So it has never been hacked. Now, when you hear about the hacks, what is hacked are the platforms. They're called the on-ramp and the off-ramp. They're the platforms that allow us to access the Bitcoin. So it's like the banks are hacked. So like FTX, we all heard about FTX, something like $40 billion. FTX was hacked because of greed and corruption, human greed, human corruption, but the Bitcoin has never been hacked. And the same with, there are a number of others that are out there. So I just want to be really clear about that. Now, once Bitcoin was deployed, there were a whole bunch of other technologists that wanted to copy and improve upon and mimic, or take that idea. So now you've got everything out there. You've got Polygon and Matic and Ethereum. Right now there's about 20,000 other blockchains. Historically, 99% of them will fail. All right. So I'm making a distinction. Bitcoin is different than the other cryptos. Personally, I think it's very risky to be involved in the other cryptos. Bitcoin now has been vetted by the Security and Exchange Commission, and the SEC has made a determination that Bitcoin is not a security, so it cannot be taxed as a security. It is a commodity. So it is considered like digital gold by the SEC. It's taxed that way. It is a commodity. And the SEC now, this week and last week, are in the process of approving ETFs for Bitcoin primarily, that make it possible for institutional investors to now consider Bitcoin as part of their portfolio for a secure digital asset that is not linked to the stock market. It's decoupled from the stock market. So Vanguard, the first, BlackRock is really pushing this through. BlackRock is going to have the first Bitcoin ETF. Grayscale is a company that has had a trust that was the only way for institutional investors to purchase Bitcoin. they have petitioned for that trust now to become an ETF. And it's been dragged through the courts for years.
Hmm.
And all of this is coming to a head. Now remember, all these cycles are converging.
Right.
So probably before the end of this year, within a couple of weeks or sometime early next year, Bitcoin ETFs will be approved by the SEC. That opens the door for institutional investors, and that money is already piling in and has now driven the cost of a single Bitcoin from, it was about $26,000 per Bitcoin in the spring of this year, and I think today it's probably around 44,000 US dollars, and there are risks.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if you're looking for a place long term, the thing with Bitcoin, it is immutable, it is transparent, it is secure. If you're looking at long term, only 21 million Bitcoin will ever be created via the algorithm. 19 million have already been created. And the ones that are remaining, now the government of Qatar, for example, wants to buy all of the remaining Bitcoin because they know where this is going. Of course, that's not possible because it's in places like Coinbase and things like that. But the bottom line is those 2 million that are left are going, because of supply and demand, will become more and more scarce, driving that price higher and higher. There are entire nations now that have adopted Bitcoin as their currency as well as their money, and others now are petitioning to do the same thing. So we could go on and on, but I just want to say, people that hear about Bitcoin, it's probably not what you've heard. I'm going to invite you to check it out. And now I'm going to say it is another possibility of where you may want to put a portion, and it is volatile. I would not put your life savings there.
Exactly.
But if you're willing to take that risk it goes in 4-year cycles. And we are entering into a 4-year cycle where it will see new all-time highs. And then those cycles will sell off via the Fibonacci sequence. They'll lose half their value. An accumulation phase, and then we'll go into another 4-year cycle 8 years from now. So it's something to consider if you don't trust traditional finance and traditional banking. And they are now training, because the ETFs are coming. The financial advisors are now being trained. There are classes that are being held, so they will understand blockchain technology and Bitcoin so that they can speak intelligently to their clients who are asking about this. This has all happened within just the last few months. So this is relatively new. So these 3 cycles are converging.
Right.
Markets are reflecting this. And the sad thing is, when you see gold at all-time highs, the only reason you're seeing gold up is because the financial markets are in such bad shape. The higher you see that gold go, this is it's flight, capital flight. People are leaving traditional investments, putting their money into something that tangible assets. They don't know what's going to happen, and they're saying, I'm going to park my money here and we'll let the markets do what they do. And at some point down the road, if I want, I can now take my money out of the tangible assets, put them back into the risk of the markets. But the debt of the dollar, the failure of the petrodollar, we are losing petrodollar dominance. Oil is no longer exclusively sold in the US dollar, which means the demand for the dollar has dropped. And when you look at the treasuries and things like that, all of the signs are that the dollar is in trouble. And because of that, people are fleeing the dollar, and they're looking for safe havens. And what we have just done is identified some of those safe havens. And another one that is really strong right now, because of the push against fossil fuels, is uranium. Because uranium reactors are being built, and there's not enough uranium to fuel those reactors when they come online. And companies like Chemico, CCJ, and this is not a recommendation, I'm just saying people want to go check it out. They're probably the best known, and they're the largest, but there are others. Uranium is a very hot commodity because the U.S. sold our ability to produce uranium largely to Russia.
Right.
And a lot of people, I was an engineer in the defense industry in the Cold War years. And what a lot of people don't know is after the Cold War, when the former United States, because it's a different country now,
Yeah.
and the former Soviet Union, when we agreed to reduce our nuclear arsenals, the warheads in those missiles, as they're disassembled, became the fuel for the nuclear reactors, and most of our uranium was coming from Russia. And now that we have sanctioned Russia because of Ukraine, Russia is no longer a part of the treaties that prevent the nuclear weapons, from being built. And Russia is no longer going to be sending their uranium to us. So we're building uranium building nuclear plants, and we don't have the fuel for that right now. And so investors know that, and you're seeing there's already been a big bump in uranium companies, but I don't think it's over, and that's a good place if you want to take a little risk and you're looking at energy over the next 5 years, somewhere around there. That might be something that people want to consider as well.
That's great. That's really enlightening. I hadn't heard half of what you were saying about the Bitcoin. I always had, and this, just came to mind. I always felt that, it had its season because of the control of, the government's trying to control everything. When they introduced their digital currency, then they would squash, right?
Well,
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, and I just want to be really clear. Again, this isn't financial advice. Bitcoin is relatively new. It will be the money of the future. I have absolutely no doubt about that. It's engineered so well, and other people will come along and they'll say, well, what about Polygon, or what about XRP, and all these other things are out there. Bitcoin is like a stripped down version. It does really well what it was designed to do. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles because that was never the intent. The intent was to free the user from the bonds and the shackles of centralized currency and policies that could lead to the breakdown that we saw in 2008. We almost lost a global financial system in 2008. And it was in response to that Bitcoin was developed. It was never designed to have all those bells and whistles, and that's why it's so slick. It's why it does exactly what it's meant to do, and it does it really, really well. Again, I'm making a distinction between that and all these other cryptocurrencies. However, and I want to say, it is only good if you can get to your computer. Is only good if you can get to the internet. If things turn south and you're in a nation of a civil war, or power goes down, and you have left your crypto on the internet, you may not be able to get to it. But the flip side of that, Ukraine was a perfect case in point, because it's possible. I'll show you. It's possible to store all of your crypto, to take it offline and put it into a little USB that you put in your pocket. You can have $1 billion on your USB, leave your home, cross the border from Ukraine into Poland, which is exactly what they did, plug it into a computer, open a bank account, and buy a new home and start a new life. You can't do that with gold. You can't do that. You can't do that with a pile of American cash. So for the first time, Ukraine showed the efficacy of digital currency in a wartime environment, where people took their wealth, who were savvy, people that were smart, and they took their families, and all they had to do was put this in your pocket and cross the border and start a new life. You can't do that with U.S. gold eagles that you're hoarding in, in under your bed, or wherever you're going to keep it. So So
Yeah.
there are advantages and disadvantages. I would never put all my eggs in one basket
Right.
for all of these things. So now the United States knows, and the Fed knows that the dollar's in trouble.
Yep.
And they are coming out and they're confusing the public because now they're going to call it, and the New York Fed has already introduced this. It is called a digital dollar. And people say, well, what's the big deal? We got Bitcoin. What's the difference between that and a digital dollar? Here's the difference, the big difference. Bitcoin is distributed. It is not owned or regulated by anything other than the software that developed it. And it is distributed on networks worldwide. You can never shut all of those networks down unless the whole planet, goes under.
Mm-hmm.
The Fed dollar is centralized. It is regulated by the central bank. And people say, well, okay, what's the big deal? I use my credit card anyway. Wouldn't it be easier to have that? Well, what makes this so unique is that it's called the CBDC, central bank digital dollar. I think most people are familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the technology is not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's the thinking of how it's applied. Do you believe, and do I believe, that my government and the banks care about me and want to help me and want me to thrive and be successful in life? Or do I believe that the world around me, where I'm seeing greater and greater degrees of loss of freedom, and the exertion of more authority, more power and control? I have to be honest. For me, I'm seeing the latter.
Yep.
Not 100%, but that's what I'm seeing. So, okay, so what's the problem? If all of our Bank of America, I believe, sent a message out to their clients. I saw an advertisement saying that at some point, their assets that they have online, they'll never lose their asset, but they will be converted to a digital currency. A digital currency means it's programmable. And there are all kinds of implications around that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean they will happen, but we become vulnerable to those things happening. So what kind of implications? For example, during the lockdowns, the government gave out money, gave out checks with the goal of people spending that money to keep the economy going. A lot of people didn't spend that money. They were so freaked out.
Right.
They said, I better save this because I don't know how long the lockdowns are going to last. I don't know if my job is still there. I don't know,
Yeah.
People were saving their money with digital currency that's programmable, that your dollar can have an expiration date. And literally, what can happen is your bank can say to you, you have to spend the money in this account by the end of this month, or it expires. It just goes away. So it prevents you from saving. So how do you get ahead? If your money can be programmed and you can be forced to spend it, or we're now looking at these extraordinary claims about climate that are simply not true. They're not true. But right now, there is a climate summit meeting happening in Dubai. It's called COP28, where the economy of the entire planet is being redesigned based on something that's not true. Industries are being dissolved. People are losing their livelihoods, their ability to create income, and there's nothing to replace what the fossil fuels that they're making go away. It's not like we've got something. Renewables aren't going to do it. They can't do it because the renewables are based on 17 rare earth minerals that are found primarily in 2 deposits in countries that are not necessarily friendly to us, Russia and China. They are toxic to mine. They are toxic at the end of their life cycle when they go into the dumps and they seep into the groundwater and into agricultural water. Unregulated child labor is used to produce the cobalt, for example, and the lithium. The cobalt that's coming out of Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. UNICEF and Amnesty International have horrible stories about what's happening to the children that are mining these. We don't get to hear that in our country.
Right.
And our country is so big, one size cannot fit all. The solar panels, it takes so much fossil fuel energy to create the silicon chips. They don't come in the ground. You have to create them. That heat cannot be created with a solar panel. It is only created by fossil fuels, and it takes so much fossil fuels to create the steel or the aluminum infrastructure, the concrete that has to go to make these things work. So the renewables are great. I've got 19 solar panels running this studio because it makes sense in the high desert where we have over 300 days of sun a year. It makes no sense in the Midwest where winter comes, the clouds come in November and they're there until May. It makes no sense. So these are examples of they're trying to change an entire industry based on something that is not true, and there's nothing there to replace it. And as we look at those kinds of shifts, they are impacting our markets. They're impacting the U.S. market, the tech market, in ways that we've never seen before, and they are manipulating those markets. So the little guy doesn't know about that manipulation, and by the time the little guy gets in on the news, it's usually too late, and they usually take a hit.
Yeah.
So this is why, in this just for this brief period of time that we're going through right now, where the dollar is losing its supremacy, the petrodollar is gone. The dollar is still the global reserve currency, but now other currencies will probably become part of that. The BRICS are developing other currencies. And China is actually hoarding the world's gold to back. They want to back their money so that they have a viable currency. And they're doing a good job of that, like ours used to be. And so for our listeners that may not know why this is important, before 1971, every US dollar you held in your hand, it was a promissory note. And it used to say at the time, I still have some, that you could trade in your dollar, your $5 or your $10 for an equivalent amount of silver in the bank. They called silver certificates, or gold. And what that meant is that we could never print more dollars than we had gold behind that dollar backing it. So we could never have the inflation eroding the value of our currency. And it actually worked really, really well until Nixon took us off. I remember I was a kid, and I remember when it happened, 1971.
Me too.
When we went off the gold standard. Then they could print as many dollars as they want. And people say, well, what's the problem with that? Here's the problem. Every dollar that you print and put into circulation dilutes the value of the dollars that are already there. And when we are printing to the tune of, during COVID, I think we were something like 20 billion a month, something like that, to keep everything going. The consequence of that is it dilutes our currency to such a degree that it takes more of the currency to buy the things we need. So what we say is the price went up. The price actually didn't go up. The value of the dollar went down. So it takes more of those paper notes to buy the same thing, but it's confusing for a lot of people. So we just say, the price of eggs or price of gas or whatever has gone up. What's actually happening is the dollar now is being weakened by the continual printing of those dollars. It's diluting. So it takes more of those dollars to buy the same commodity, to buy the gasoline or the food or the water or whatever it is that we're talking about. And that's not sustainable. That can only go on for so long. So there is a race to the bottom to devalue the currencies. And once that happens, there will be some kind of an announcement, and they're going to come out and say, okay, we no longer recognize physical money. For a period of time, we'll probably have both. And they'll say after a certain day, only digital dollars will be recognized. And then we're in a new world, and how you invest in that world Chris, maybe you know more about this than I do. How do you invest and save in a world where your life savings is all on a centralized computer somewhere? Do you know the answer to that? I mean, how does that work?
Well, you've covered a lot of the things that I talk about, basically, right, with precious metals and real estate, and I'm still in insurance products where I have tax free. If you have money that's already in the system, and I'm using the IUL for the tax free, and doubles and triples the money. So so the everything that man, you just said everything basically agree with, but
Well,
in
we covered a
such
lot of ground. I know
right, you
that.
covered it so eloquently. There's just one concern of how manipulated this is, that they're going to not allow even Bitcoin, that it's going to be so controlled that inside of it, I
They
keep
can't stop it. They can't stop it. And
they
this is the
can't.
beauty.
Okay,
They can't.
okay,
Now they can make it difficult for Americans to access it. They can do that.
okay.
Bitcoin is
That's
global,
yeah,
decentralized, and requires no trust of another human because it is all based on the algorithm that was launched in 2008. It is distributed on servers across the planet. So
right.
they can never make it go away. They can make it. They could make it just like uh, your state or your
Hmm.
city can put a filter on
Right,
your server so that you can't read certain books or you can't see certain movies.
right.
That and Canada did this during the truckers strike.
Oh yeah, yes,
They
yeah,
blocked the truckers from getting digital contributions from people that wanted to help them. They
yep,
showed their hand on how authoritarian they are
exactly.
willing to become. That's not a democracy.
Right.
So they could make it very easy or very difficult for Americans to do that. I don't think they're going to do that because BlackRock
Mm,
runs so much, has their fingers so deep in so much of the American
everything.
economy. And
Yep.
once BlackRock says we're in, and then Vanguard says we're in, and Citibank says we're in, and they're opening the ETFs to make investment. And then I'm again making the distinction. This is only Bitcoin. It's not about
Right.
all the other stuff out there.
Hmm.
I don't know that they would do that necessarily. But so now here's where it gets.
Yeah.
I'm not saying these things will happen.
Right.
I'm saying that the pieces are in place that would make it easy for them to happen.
Yes.
Uh, I spent a lot of time in Europe, and the EU is eyeballing China as the beta test
Mm,
country for a lot of what we're talking about, because China has already, Google and Facebook and Microsoft developed the system that China is using. That's the beta test site.
right.
So China now has a digital yuan. They've gone to digital currency. The concern is, and what they have done, and I hope America never does this,
Mm,
and I don't think America is wired to do this, but this is where a lot of the concern comes from.
right.
That digital currency is linked in China to what's called a social credit system.
Yep.
So the social credit system is where everything is digitized, which is what the United Nations is pushing for America right now. They want
Yep.
everything digitized. If our money is digitized,
Hmm.
then our spending habits
Exactly.
become trackable. All right.
Yep.
So why is that a problem? Now, this is where all the pieces come together. We're being told that carbon dioxide is a problem. So if you drive too much, that could be a problem. So if you have digital currency and you go to your gas station,
Right.
you get gas, and they say, well, this is the third time you bought gas this month. You're driving too much. It could be that that transaction is denied, or what's more likely, it would be taxed. You
Mm,
will pay a premium because you're driving too much.
yeah.
Or if you're eating too much of the kinds of foods that require a lot of fossil fuels, or you're eating too much,
Right.
red beef is one of the things they've talked
Hmm.
about. I mean, so it's not happening here. It is happening in China. So what happens is all of those, if you are up to date on your immunizations, and if you have gone for your annual physical, and if you don't owe child support, and if you paid all your taxes, and you're a good citizen, there is something you have. And every citizen is given a cell phone, given a mobile phone, so you can't say you don't have one.
Right.
And it has an app, and I've seen these. So I mean, this isn't hypothetical. They actually do this here. On that phone, there's an app, and that app will reflect your social credit score. So if you are behind in child support, or if you are not up on your immunizations and you go to get on a plane, they will flash, and it's either a red or a yellow or a green. And if you come up, with red, they'll say, well, you need to correct this before you're able to participate in society, before you're able to use public transportation, before you're able to buy your groceries. That's the concern. The central bank digital currency is the platform that opens the door to that possibility. And I'm not saying it will happen. It is happening in China.
Yeah.
Europe, the European Union has said, we like this system, and they're adopting it. And now what you're seeing play out in real time is you're seeing the EU and the United Nations pressuring our current administration to get with the program, so that there's continuity between North America and Europe for travel and commerce and business and recreation and vacations and all. They want this continuity. And the only way to do that is to be able to track and trace our monetary habits. So this is the concern. And a lot of people say, well, it's conspiracy and all that, and a conspiracy simply means that people are conspiring to put a system in place. So there is a conspiracy to do this. How far it goes in America is up to our governing bodies. And we have governance, and we have states that now have passed legislation that forbid. They say we forbid digital currency in this state. And hopefully when it comes to the congressional level, they'll say America is not wired for this. But I think you'll see a fight. I think you'll see a very convincing argument. And I think probably one of the ways that you will see America persuaded into this is because the debt is so high in most households, is that our government will say, we will forgive your debt on some things, student loans, probably, mortgages, and high credit card debt, which is averaging. There was a report this morning, the average credit card debt is about 23% right now on credit cards. So if the government comes along and says, we are in an unsustainable place, we want to help our people, we will forgive your mortgage, your credit card debt, your car payments, and your student loans. All you have to do is subscribe to a system that already has your name on it in the bank, where your digital currency is waiting for you. And you tell me what Americans who are in danger of bankruptcy or foreclosure, or have gotten in over their head on credit card debts, student loans, or lost their jobs during the pandemic, who would not go for that? And I think you will see a lot of Americans see that as a way out.
Yes.
And I think you'll see that showdown probably coming up in this next administration.
I totally agree with you. Everything you said is spot on, and go on.
Yeah, well, it ties into morals. It ties into sovereignty.
Yeah.
It ties into what America was founded upon.
Yeah.
And the deep truth of the reasons that our founders created the nation in the way that they did, and who even backed the creation of our nation. There's a whole story about why America was created during a time when these values were not shared with the rest of the world. And they knew that we would come to a point where we need these freedoms. And if we lose those freedoms, no nation will ever give its people the freedoms that America has right now. I think it's worth preserving.
It is.
It's a deeply spiritual topic, because money is an expression of our spiritual energy that we exude in the world to produce goods, services, or information. That's pretty much, all of us fall pretty much into one of those three categories. Our life energy produces goods, some kind of service to other people, or some kind of or some combination of those. And we are rewarded for that with a system that ideally can be preserved over time, is recognized by other people. It's something that's portable, it's divisible. These are all economic principles. And when we talk about a central bank digital currency, it violates those principles. So realistically, I think we'll probably have a digital dollar. What I think we really need, and it may not be a bad, certainly it'd be convenient. Where we get into trouble is if that digital dollar is ever programmed or linked to a social credit system, we have become subjects of an authoritarian regime.
Yes.
And I hope it never happens. And I think we have the means to let our voices be known so that that doesn't happen. So
yes, yes. Just to conclude, because it is right on the edge of that, and it's actually inside of some banks already, that system,
yeah.
right? In some states, yes, in some states, no. But just for the listeners, financial emergencies and just like a practical advice you've given, amazing. It's been fabulous. We could go on for hours. And I know you have to go, but
Well,
just
I just
one.
want to tell you, I don't have a hard out at the top of the hour. I've
Oh,
got I do have another interview, and I
okay.
told them I was doing this, and
Okay.
that if you want to go another, we can go 10 after or something like
Okay,
that.
good, because
Yeah.
because
So what
yeah.
would you like to leave our viewers and our community with today? And on an uplifting note,
Yes, that's
because
that.
I'm an
Yeah.
optimist
Yes.
and I'm a realist. Realistically,
Yes.
we're going through a change we've never seen
Right.
before, and we have to face that full
That's
on.
right.
We can't look away.
Yes.
We have options, and we're sharing those options, and we are as a society being programmed with fear around those options.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin is being made in the media to look flaky,
Right.
scary. Congress, Elizabeth Warren again is during the hearings is really trying to push back because she's saying criminals. This is what enables Hamas to be able to finance and all of this.
Right.
So they're pushing back against this. On the other hand, BlackRock wouldn't be engaged in this if they didn't think this is the way, to the degree they are, if they didn't think it was the way of the future. Vanguard, Citibank, Chase, Michael Saylor of MicroStrategies is the largest and institutional investor, and is putting he has a company called MicroStrategies. He's putting his cash into Bitcoin. He's caught a lot of flack for it because it's risky. He is now up billions in his company because of his vision. So you just have to check it all out. And I'm not saying I would never put all my eggs in one basket. No. I think you need some cash because we're all in the system. We need to have, if the system broke, and I'll give you a perfect example. I was in Australia over 9/11. I couldn't get back into my country. ATMs were not honored. Banks were not honored. And when a system breaks like that, even if it's only temporarily, you need to have something concrete and tangible in your hand that you can get to, gas in your car, food on your table. So you need to have an allocation for that. Mm-hmm. The bulk of your life energy, you have to say, you draw a line and say, I'm not willing to lose a penny of this hard-earned money. Where should I park this money? I personally, recognizing what's happening with the dollar, with inflation, with the loss of the petrodollar, with the loss of purchasing power, I would look at a tangible asset. Mm-hmm. Tangible assets. And so again, if you're looking at long-term or short-term, if you're looking at short-term, maybe convert it into precious metals, 1 ounce silver eagles, 1 ounce gold eagles. Those are recognized and accepted all over the world. You can always take that, buy a loaf of bread, put gas in your truck if you want. Long-term, maybe take a portion and put it into land, because a lot of people are losing their land because they can't make the payments. There's foreclosures on farms, big acreages, foreclosures on homes in the city as well as in the country. Commodities, water is becoming a rare and precious commodity, and food. And maybe another conversation, we could talk about how you invest in those things. But food, I think, is, and I think we're going to see in America, there have been 11 food processing plants that have burned to the ground in the last 6 months. And we're seeing corporations buy up the farmland from the farmers that are no longer getting subsidies for climate change disaster. So they're going broke. They have to sell their farms. Corporations are buying these farms, and how they grow the food, if they grow the food, and where our food comes from. We're talking about what's called food security. Is a big conversation. It's not to frighten people, but it's a different time, and we need to recognize that this is not business as usual. So it's only a problem if we don't recognize it, and it's only a problem if we don't say, hey, maybe put a little money into some kind of food security for me and my family. So, and I think an element of risk. I think the markets are going to do some wild things because the markets are based in mass investor psychology. Investors are seeing a world they've never seen before, and they respond financially. So if you've got a little bit you want to keep into the markets and you're willing to take that risk, I think there's some big upside that can come in some of the sectors we're looking at. And you've got to watch it. It's not park it and park it and leave it forever. These are, if you're not willing to do that, I would park it into something long-term that you feel safe: land, water, food, metals, things like that. So does that make sense if we say it that way?
Absolutely. And we will follow up on the how to another time. Just one little twinkle on the top of mindset. There's so much fear and financial emergencies and food shortages and money and all that. What would you tell them how to stay calm, or how to,
sure. That's a good question. What I would say is we're living a time of extremes.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. The science tells us we're living, at the very least, a convergence of climate, conflict, and economic cycles. And there are others, but at the very least. So those extremes are only a problem if we're trying to live our lives business as usual, as we have in the last 50 years of our investment career or whatever.
Right.
If you acknowledge that these are a time of extremes, and this can be a really healthy thing. You sit down with your family at the family dinner table and you say, what's important? What's important to us? And if the things that are important, if we didn't have access to them for a couple of days, a week, a month, could we live without that and prioritize those things? And then you begin to look at your life in ways and make it a family project. And kids love to participate in this stuff. And you set your mind at ease, because the changes are only a problem if we're not prepared for the changes. If we recognize, and it's not forever, this little window of time, just a few years, the convergence of these cycles, the politics of the world, the wars of the world, the climate of the world, it makes sense to shift our strategies. I'm an optimist, and I believe that there's a beautiful world on the other side of these changes. And a world that is fair, it is equitable. I think war will become a thing of our past within our lifetimes. And I think we're going to see some difficult times to get there, because that's, there's a funny thing, Kris. Humans, and I don't know why this is, but humans seem to have to experience what they don't want before they say they don't want it, rather than saying, this is the way I choose to live, and let's go for it. So we've had to experience the droughts and the famines and the holocausts and the global wars and social breakdowns. And then we say, oh, well, we don't want that. Rather than saying, hey, let's build a harmonious, equitable world where we love and respect and honor one another, work together, because we can create great and beautiful things, because that's our nature. As humans, that's our nature, to create great and beautiful things for ourselves and beauty in the world. And I think this This is the transitional lifetime to get there. It takes one generation, has to live everything that we've ever known, and then experience the breakdown of unsustainable systems, and then choose a new way forward. And it takes a really strong soul and a resilient heart and a resilient mind. And if you're in this world right now, that's what you signed up for.
That's right.
So as community is important. And so I want to thank you, Kris, because you're a powerful hub, and you've created this community of people to come to just for reassurance, for advice. We're all going to get through this.
Right.
And we're going to be better for it. We're going to get through it. The question is, what do we become in the presence of the challenges that life brings to our doorstep? Do we succumb to the fear and to the anger, or the sense that we need retribution, or we need to get even with somebody, or can we look at these shifts and say, this is the opportunity to take the best of what we know to be true, and the things that don't work anymore, let's don't do them anymore. And I think that's what this lifetime is all about. Next time you and I, if we have Gregg and Kris part 2, I think we will have seen some of the changes that we're talking about right now, because I'm looking at a short timeline, short horizon line for a lot of these. I think because it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
What we're living now, we can't go on like this.
No, exactly. Amen. Well said. That's just, hard out there.
Yeah.
Gregg, wonderful. Yeah, we could go on forever, but that really caps it off there. And I mean, I got to listen to this a few times. There's so much in there. Gregg, it's been again fabulous to be with you and to share these beautiful spaces together, and to be like-minded, and to be able to share this with all the people that get to listen and be blessed by it. So thank you so much.
Well, Kris, the truth is you didn't know what we would talk about, and it's unscripted. So I want to thank you for your trust, and again, for your community and everyone listening. I just want to thank you for all you're doing to be the best version of yourself and create the best world possible. And together, we're going to get through this in a really beautiful way.
Amen. I totally agree. Thank you, Gregg, so much.
Thanks so much. Take good care, Kris.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. As we wrap up this crucial episode of Money 911, remember that prosperity is a universal call, and the path of wealth is intertwined with the journey of self-discovery. And if you want to check out what Gregg was talking about, check out his YouTube channel, Gregg Braden, on YouTube, and he'll break down a lot of what he was talking about. So please dial in every week. Share the knowledge. Let's be the change we want to see in our financial lives. Until the next call, this is your financial first responder, Kris Miller, signing off. There's so much to learn about healthy money. I hope today's discussion brings you one step closer to securing and protecting your future. So you can get started on the right foot, go to meetwithkrismiller.com and schedule your free financial fitness strategy session. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Money 911 so you don't miss our next episode, which includes health, wealth, and peace of mind.